Okay, I think we're ready to go here. So I'm excited to be here with you guys today to help all of you get more jobs done faster. So over the next about 50 minutes or so, I'm going to show you the unique process I use to help hundreds of shops get more done faster. And by the time we're done here today, you'll know exactly what it takes to accelerate your maintenance shop. In order to get the most out of this, it's important that each of you generates a vivid picture of how you'll use these proven strategies in your own shop. So take out a pen right now and get ready to answer a couple questions. I'd like to take a quick moment and imagine that it's tomorrow morning. You get out of your car and walk into your building through your shop and discover that magically your productivity has doubled. Now think about this for a minute and really picture it. You're getting more done than you've ever been able to accomplish. You're meeting and often exceeding your internal customers' expectations. The maintenance shop is no longer who gets blamed for all manufacturing's missed due dates and issues. Sound too good to be true? Well, I've seen it over and over again using the techniques I'm about to share with you today. So just play the game with me for a moment. Here are the questions I want you to consider. If you woke up tomorrow morning and magically found that this had happened in your shop, how would your life be different? What would you be able to do that you can't do now? What would the environment of your shop be like? What would your internal customer think of you? And how might your reputation change? And how would all of that affect your company's bottom line? Let's face it, you don't need me to tell you the benefits of increased productivity, but the most important question is, how would increased success affect your lives? How would it impact you personally? How would it affect the people that you work with? From line workers to executives, I've seen far too many manufacturers living a life of chaos and stress. Every day is a new struggle of desperation as deadlines seem to come faster and faster, and it becomes a lot more difficult. But what if you could break free of the chaos and accelerate your shop straight to the top? Well, let's stop looking at what ifs and talk about how I've made it happen and how you can too. At the end, I'm going to reveal exactly what you can do tomorrow to start improving so that you can get results. So let's jump right in. There are 4 specific things you should know to get your shop to the next level and rapidly increase your revenues. First, it's critically important to recognize that scheduling is one of the most vital areas of your business. The truly successful companies have conquered the challenges of scheduling, and once you understand the secret of scheduling, you'll be amazed how much you can get done and how quickly you can do it. I'm going to cover the challenges to scheduling a highly custom job shop, the mistakes most shops make when trying to schedule, because if you don't understand why what you're currently doing isn't working, it's pretty difficult to improve. Second, I'm going to reveal the solution, the whole system, nothing held back, so you're clear on what it takes to reduce your lead times and get more done. Third, we need to work together to assure that the solution is a perfect fit for you, that it will work consistently and effectively, and that the results come quickly. Custom job shops by nature are very complex and very different. Every single client I've worked with had a series of factors that came together to form a unique set of needs, and the secret is to discover what would make the difference in your specific shop. And fourth, it's time for you to take action. I'm also going to get very specific on the first step so that you can get started tomorrow. You need to be able to apply it to your shop tomorrow. So how do you do all of this? Well, good question. In fact, that's the question I first started asking myself when I was in graduate school. I was working for Clorox at the time at a Kingsford charcoal plant when I discovered a book that changed my life, and maybe you've read it. The book is called The Goal, and I loved it. It was logical, it was common sense, and the engineer in me immediately connected with it. And there was a really good story in the book about Herbie. And Herbie is the Boy Scout that was a little bit overweight, had a very heavy backpack, and kept falling to the back of the hike. And what these Boy Scouts realized pretty quickly is that if they're going to go faster, they had to figure out a way to help Herbie go faster. So as soon as I read Herbie's story, I knew this was the answer to productivity problems. I vowed to devote my career to finding the unique set of solutions that would solve these problems, and I did. And it all boils down to one critical fact. Our output is dictated by our constraint. So what is blocking your success? What are the unique factors in your business that if we fixed, removed, altered, or somehow adjusted them would allow you to take your company right to the top? This is the critical question that shortcuts everything. The answer can be the difference between inevitable failure and extraordinary success. So how do we find the constraint? And the answer is, it's in the scheduling. In fact, I surveyed 1,500 business owners and worked with well over 100 custom job shops, and I consistently found that the single most powerful point of intervention is scheduling. When you tackle the scheduling monster, you've got it nailed. So let's take a look at what makes scheduling such a difficult monster for your business, for your particular maintenance shop. The fact is, scheduling is hard, and with good reason. First, customers change their mind. And even though your customers might be internal customers, they probably alter which priorities they want you to work on. So they change their mind a lot. They move their orders up or back or some of both. And of course, as soon as they do that, your scheduling needs to be redone. Next, our vendors, raw material, outside process vendors, they don't always deliver to us as promised. And if they're off, it can throw us off. Our mix can vary. This is even more dramatic the more custom you are. So the more different things that seem to come in, the more this is true. One week you can produce thousands of something, and the next week nothing. One week you have a bunch of emergency repairs, the next week very little. So due to all these mix changes, your constraint can actually move. I was working with one custom job shop that had their constraint bounce between the lathe, the mill, and grinding, and it would bounce day to day, week to week, depending on what orders came through the door that particular week. Another challenge can be the capabilities of your employees. Very few shops are blessed with complete cross-training, but even if you have a fair amount of cross-training, that doesn't mean that your employees will all show up or show up on time. In addition, our processes can be unreliable. This is even more true if you're constantly running new parts you haven't run before, dealing with something new. All kinds of differences can come into play here, causing a lot of unreliability. But people aren't the only resource that can let you down. You also can have machines that break down, and of course it always happens at the worst possible moment, creating scheduling nightmares and confirming that Murphy is alive and well and likely toasting to us right now. So we have machines break down. Add to that, our data is not readily available or accurate, and it makes it difficult to improve the situation. Time estimates are just that, they're estimates. I have a saying that the only thing we know for sure about our estimate is that they're wrong. So if a customer says, well, how long is it going to take to do something, at best we're giving them an estimate. And finally, communication between silos can be difficult. Orders are thrown kind of over the wall, relationship between sales and manufacturing, and even the maintenance shop, all of that suffers. So we schedule and we update the schedule, and we get stuck in a perpetual loop of rescheduling due to all the sources of variability. So these problems make it difficult, if not impossible, for you to be 100% meet every commitment that you gave. They lengthen your lead time and increase your chaos. So as manufacturers, we typically try to improve and deal with all these challenges by adding more detail to the scheduling. So we think, well, geez, if we could just schedule every job, know when every job is going to be on every machine, then we could actually give good estimates of when things might be done. And while it seems like that would be a perfect solution, it is in fact the worst thing you can do. The simple truth is that, contrary to popular belief, those sources of variability do not go away or even reduce by adding more detail. Having a more detailed schedule means that we're just more wrong. And as we encounter this variability, we spend our days constantly updating the schedule, constantly juggling priorities, and so we have to wonder, well, why do we do this? So why do so many manufacturers continue to use these old school methods? We can answer that question by asking another question. What's one of the key measures that you use to make sure you're going to make money and optimize ROI? So what's a key measure that you use? What's something that you might be measured on in your maintenance shop? And that is pretty easy to answer. A lot of us get measured on efficiency. So efficiency has been the gold standard, but it's actually totally wrong. It's in the name of efficiency that we do what we do and experience the frustration and chaos of trying to run our shop. So let me explain. Let's say we have a fairly simple job shop. We've got a shop that has, let's say, 5 steps. So your typical repair that you're doing, the typical type, or maybe if you're building molds or if you're repairing something, whatever your in-house shop is doing, we're going to have a simple 5-step routing. So I've just labeled them here, A through E. Now some of you may have 3 steps, some of you may have 15 steps or something in between, but we'll keep it simple and go with just these 5 steps. Now let's talk about what it means that we're all driven by efficiency, and I think this is driven into us at a very young age to be efficient. We know we're always supposed to be busy or doing whatever it is we're supposed to do. So let's say that I have these 5 steps and I want to be efficient. So what do I do if I want to be efficient? Well, I make sure that the capacity I have at each of these steps is about the same for the mix of work I typically do. So if I want to be able to make 20 per day of whatever I do, and if I want to be efficient, then I need to make sure that each area, each step in my routing will have the capacity to do about 20 per day. Now this is called balance capacity, and it's balance meaning no one person or department has any more capacity than anybody else. They all have the capacity necessary to do what we expect to do on a daily basis. Now let's talk about what can go wrong with this. If each step has the capacity to do 20 per day, then that 20 is an average. So if I drew that as a distribution and I say 20 is the average, then I can calculate the probability that I'm going to get 20 or more out of any one of these steps. If I took any one step in isolation, we'll take step A here, I can easily calculate the probability of getting 20 or more out of that step. That's simply the area under the curve here. So there's a 50% chance I will produce 20 or more at any one step. But sometimes I will produce on the low end and I may only get out 17. And sometimes I'll produce more than 20 and I might get out as many as 23. There's a 50% chance of getting 20 or more out of any one step in isolation. And assuming the same variability at each step, and I have 5 steps, interdependency between the 5 steps, meaning in most of your routings you can only, you can't start with step C or any department that has available capacity. You have to do your manufacturing steps in order. You have to start with step A. That's interdependency. Now depending on how many steps you have, and I happen to have 5, I'm going to put the probability of getting 20 or more at any one step, the 0.5, to the 5th. And if you had 10 steps, it would be to the 10th. In this case, we have the probability of getting 20 or more out of this system, perfectly designed to get 20, is actually only 3.13%. So I may have thought I was going to get out 20, I may have designed the system to get out 20, that's the theoretical capacity, but in reality it's going to be very, very difficult to produce 20. And the reason is whatever comes out of step A, let's say we get 18 done in the first step, and we pass 18 to the second step, step B, it does have the capacity to do 20, but it also has variability. Let's say that the variability of each step is plus or minus 3, like we had in the first step. So the second step got past 18, it has variability of plus or minus 3. Now it can't get more done, so it can't be plus 3, it only got past 18. It can't be plus 3, but it can be minus 3. And whatever gets done gets passed to the third step. It also has variability. It can produce what it gets past, plus or minus 3. It can't be plus 3, it can always be minus 3. So it's very unlikely that we're going to produce 20 per day, and actually there's only about a 3% chance of what we're seeing here. The next question is what are we likely to get if we're not going to get 20? So if I can't produce 20 in this system, then what am I likely to produce? Well, I did not know the answer to that question, but in Excel there's something called a Monte Carlo simulation that you can do, and I put this scenario into that simulation. I assumed we had 5 steps, that the average of each step is 20 plus or minus 3, and I ran this simulation 1,000 times. This gave me 1,000 outputs. Then I graphed the output to create a distribution. Sure enough, 3% of the time there was way down here, I did get 20 or more out of the system. But the average was far less than the 20 that we desired. It was actually 9 point something. I found this kind of depressing, so I rounded up to 10. So now we're only getting 10 in a system that was designed to do 20. The efficiency mentality causes us to balance capacity. So because it's not, we're not wasting anything, so we make sure we have this balanced capacity. We don't want to waste capacity by having any resource have more capacity than it needs. So we make sure that all the resources have the same capacity for whatever our typical requirements are. That thinking would work if there was no variability. If you never had a bottleneck, if Murphy never came to visit, it would work. You may not know your theoretical capacity. So in other words, in your case, you may not know that these are 20s or know what they are. So you may not have that information. But if I asked you, are you producing to your full capacity that you suspect that you have, the answer would probably be no. You don't need to know what your capacity at each step of your process is. The key takeaway is that if you're like most of us, you are intuitively balancing your capacity to reduce waste and increase efficiency. Then anytime you experience variability, any of those 9 challenges that we just talked about that create the scheduling monster we talked about, it makes it really hard to get things done. Now, there is one more thing we do in the name of efficiency that is sabotaging us. We increase our work in process, our WIP, and let me explain. Due to balanced capacity and the reality that variability does exist, sometimes we have resources with no work. Have you ever had an employee that did not have something to do? Didn't it just drive you crazy? And probably didn't you find something for them to do immediately, quickly? And did you feel better once everyone was working again? I thought so, because that's exactly what I used to do. The best way to ensure everyone and/or every machine has something to do is to make all the orders you have in-house or all the available work available to be worked on. Your employees have different skills. Machines work at different rates. Machines go down, all that. So if you want to be efficient, you want to keep your resources busy. And the best way to do that is to put all the work on the floor. With all the available work on the floor, you've increased the likelihood that everyone will have something to do, right? And that's why we do it. Well, what's so bad about that? It does sound efficient. Let's say that your quoted lead time is 6 weeks for whatever you produce. There we go. It could be 1 week or 10 weeks or a combination, whatever it is. But in a lot of job shops, the lead times change depending on what it is that you're doing. But we'll use an example of 6 weeks. So knowing your quoted lead time, what I can tell you is if you're like most of the people I start working with, if your quoted lead time is 6 weeks, then the amount of time of work and process you have in your system is about 6 weeks worth. Why? Because of efficiency. In other words, if I want to increase the likelihood of every resource, person, and/or equipment, depending on your situation, has something to do, so we can have the most efficient use of our resources, all the work's on the floor. The way to do that is to make sure that all the available work is there. So your work in process level is 6 weeks worth, or whatever your typical quoted lead time is. The key is that all your work is on the floor and your WIP is maxed out, so all available work's out there. There is a direct correlation between the amount of WIP you have and how long it takes a job to get through your shop. The more WIP, the longer it takes, and you know this from experience. That's why when you're busy, you may quote a longer lead time or let your internal customer know this is going to take a little bit longer than when you're not busy. When you're not busy, things can go through a lot faster. So our efficiency focus is causing our jobs to take longer to get done. And because our quoted lead time is the same as the time it takes to get a job through the shop, if anything goes wrong, chaos increases and the chance of meeting the date that you said gets much worse. So who would have thought that something that's supposed to be so good, efficiency, is actually having a negative effect? Clearly, efficiency is not the answer. In fact, efficiency is part of the problem. It is actually slowing us down. We need to stop trying to be efficient and instead focus on what we really want. We want to get more jobs done faster so that we can do more jobs with the same people and resources, so that we can make more money and get the things we really want from our business. Apart from great quality, the best way to get a steady stream of consistently satisfied customers is to get jobs done faster when promised. Of course, once you do that, then you're going to be getting more customers, and that means increasing business, increasing revenues, and all of that. So here is what you must remember if you really want to improve your scheduling. Efficiency is not a prerequisite to improvement, it is an effect. In order to become efficient, you have to stop doing the things that are typically associated with efficiency and start focusing on flow. This is what I call your velocity. I began development of the velocity scheduling system in 2002 and have since used it with dramatic results in well over 100 highly custom job shops. And these shops may do anything from field work, emergency repairs out in the field, to maybe some repeat business, to everything in between. So if you want the same results that these shops have got, here's what you need to do. Realize that the goal is to make more money. It's not to keep everyone busy or to be efficient. Or in your case, because if you might be a maintenance shop, your goal is to make sure that manufacturing is waiting on you, hopefully not at all, but the least amount possible. So the secret here is to become efficient at getting stuff through the shop. So the first thing you have to do is to shift your goals and shift your thinking. In velocity scheduling system, you measure flow. You don't worry about, measure, or track efficiencies. You aren't focused on tracking the time you spend on a job. That separates you from the pack, and it's what you need, and it's what you know that you need tracking to get more jobs done faster. You never detail schedule, and you never add detail. You have learned that due to variability, most detail just means more wrong and more rescheduling. You have reduced WIP to about half of where it is now. You and your team always focus on finishing what you started rather than starting more stuff. You use buffers to absorb and manage the variability. You track major disruptions to flow. As a velocity scheduling system expert, you always know that your major disruptions to flow are, and you use that information to direct your continuous improvement. You improve first your largest disruption to flow, then the second largest, and so on. And you know that focus and flow are the name of the game, so you always get more jobs done faster. And finally, you always remember that the system is based on uniqueness, so you tweak it to fit precisely for you and your shop. So can you picture where velocity scheduling will take you? Let's take a closer look. To compare the 6-week lead time that we were talking about before, and to compare and contrast the efficiency approach to the velocity approach, I'll draw those 5 circles again and label the lead time as 6 weeks. In the velocity scheduling system, the first thing we're going to do is cut the work in process in half. So instead of having 6 weeks worth of stuff in process, we're only going to have 3. Now this is a picture of a velocity board that we use for our velocity scheduling system. We expect 3 weeks worth of jobs to be somewhere on this board. Now because I've cut the work in process in half, I really haven't improved from 6 weeks to 3 weeks, because sitting over here waiting for its turn is the other 3 weeks worth of stuff. So far I've gained nothing by cutting work in process. I am still showing 6 weeks in total, 3 in process and 3 waiting for its turn. Okay, so let me explain where the improvement comes in and how we get faster and faster. Well, first of all, by cutting the work in process, I have less stuff for my team to work on, and each job spends less time sitting and waiting. Because I have less stuff for my team to work on, and they know what their priorities are, we have one priority system: red, yellow, green. They know to work on red stuff first, assuming that they have the skill to work on it, then yellow, then green. The priority system ensures that we work on the jobs that have been in the process the longest. The velocity board is a big physical board, and the goal is to finish all jobs by the end of the yellow zone. So when the combination of less WIP, which reduces queue time, a clear priority system, and a goal to finish by the end of the yellow zone, we actually start to finish by the end of the yellow zone. This happens really fast. It's amazing what less WIP and focusing on finishing what started can do. And as a result of finishing most jobs by the end of the yellow zone, this is no longer 3 weeks. It's 2 weeks. And if this is 2 weeks, then so is this. And very quickly, the jobs that were taking us 6 weeks to get done are now taking only 4. In addition to this improvement, we work on getting what I call full kit for the jobs that are waiting for their turn to be produced. While these jobs are waiting for their turn to be worked on, we make sure that we have everything that we need so that when we do start on a job, we can go from start to finish without disruption. We typically waste a lot of time looking for parts, raw materials, tools, programs, drawing, whatever it is. Imagine if every time you started a job, you had everything you needed to get it finished. The effect of this improvement is that our velocity improves and jobs are now getting done faster, a little earlier than the end of the yellow zone. We size the velocity board so that you are only going into the red zone about 5% of the time. The reason we go into the red zone is typically due to one of our sources of variability, one of those 9 challenges. But whatever the reason, it is a disruption to the flow. It has slowed our velocity. And if we want more jobs to get done faster, we need to reduce or eliminate the biggest disruptions to flow we have. So every time I go into the red zone, I find out why. Every time I go into the red zone, I find out why, and after a while, I've collected a nice list of reasons why. Then, what I do is Pareto those reasons. Now, Pareto is a fancy way of saying how often did each reason occur. So, for example, if we looked at all these reasons and we graphed the number of times each reason occurred, we might get a graph that looks something like this. The reason that occurs most often is the highest bar. And this is our biggest disruption to flow. Now, because we have limited resources and we can't work on everything, we can use this to focus our continuous improvement efforts. The one and only improvement project I should work on now has been identified. So if you have Lean or Six Sigma teams, we now know where to put them to work. It turns out that our improvement projects should not come from a brainstorming session, but instead a properly run system will provide the insight on where to improve to get the biggest bang for your buck. If we eliminate or reduce our biggest disruption to flow, the main reason we were going into the red zone, we are probably not going into the red zone as much, which means our average velocity will be better. And so our velocity has improved even more. And now with the combination of full kit, focused process improvement, the time through our shop on average is 1.5 weeks. And if this is 1.5 weeks, so is this. This is how we get about a 50% reduction in the time through our shop. We were at 6 weeks, and now by ignoring efficiency, we're now completing the same amount of work in half the time, just 3 weeks. We're getting more jobs done faster. And these results occur pretty darn fast depending on how fast you implement. Starting tomorrow, you can reduce your WIP and focus on finishing, and you will see an impact in your operation. And that's your homework assignment. The rest of the system takes some experience to figure out and customize for your situation. But here are some of the things you will need to figure out. How to size your velocity board for the mix of products you have. How to deal with jobs that take 2 hours versus the ones that take 2,000 hours. How to deal with any Kanban parts or stock parts if you happen to have those. How to handle a mixture of manufacturing cells along with regular production. How to handle emergency orders and priority orders, and what to do for repair work versus production work, what to do if you do prototype work, how to size your to-be released board to ensure that every job has full kit before it's turned to be released to the velocity board, what to include on your full kit checklist versus what should be on the piece of paper that goes on the velocity board, and other questions for your specific environment starting conditions. While velocity scheduling system is simple, it can handle a wide variety of cases. The key is to customize it for your unique environment. Every shop is different, so customization is extremely important. Here's the implementation framework that we use. The first thing we do is to reduce your work in process. You can do this tomorrow and should. This leads to an immediate reduction in the lead time through your shop and also an immediate improvement to cash flow as job takes less time sitting around. Another nice side effect is an immediate reduction in overtime. As you start shipping 20 to 50% more and doing it with less overtime, you will notice a nice increase in profits. The details of how to control your WIP to maintain that lower level will depend on your specific situation, but controlling WIP is essential. The next key implementation elements are the visual scheduling and visual planning components of the system. This is where we design your velocity board and your to-be release board and get those up. They provide the key communication and priority system in your shop, making it clear where to focus and making lead time problems a thing of the past. It is in this step where a lot of those customization questions will become apparent, and you will need to customize the solution for your unique situation. It's not that there's one velocity board that I just mail you a velocity board and to-be release board that you put up. These are custom to your particular shop. Then the third element in our implementation framework is systemizing the PUGI process, the process of ongoing improvement. Continuous improvement is not an accident, but a key part of the velocity system. You will need to collect and analyze those whys so that your improvement progress does not stagnate. As you eliminate and reduce your biggest disruptions to flow, your chaos will reduce. It is also in this step where you will operationalize the process to determine the release order of your jobs and monitor your load versus capacity of your shop. This planning will eliminate scheduling surprises and help you plan for capacity expansions. When you have this future planning view of your shop and when priorities are clear and clearly communicated, chaos substantially reduces. Let's take a look at an example. Tanya inherited the business from her father, and despite the downturn in the economy, they had tons of work, and they couldn't get it out the door. Their due date performance was less than 40%. Customers were threatening to take their business elsewhere, opportunities were abound, but how do you take on more work when you can't deliver what you've got? The saving grace was that their competition wasn't doing much better. Tanya saw a huge opportunity to take market share if she could get on time, if they could do it better than the competition. It would be an understatement to say that her team was skeptical of abandoning efficiency. But Tanya held firm and insisted that they do the program and follow my instructions to the letter. In only a few months, Tanya's team cut time through their shop in half, increased due date performance to over 97%, and started shipping twice as much. And notice that if you double what you're shipping, you have become more efficient. Efficiency is not a prerequisite for improvement. It is an effect. So what effects can you expect? You can expect a substantial improvement in due date performance or your ability to meet whatever promises you give. That's substantial depending on your situation. Tanya went from 40% to 97%, but I had one client that started at 95% and they increased to 99+%, and that was substantial for them. How important is delivering on time or meeting whatever date you've given your internal customer? How important is that? And how does it affect all of your business and the rest of your manufacturing business? It can be pretty important. And how much money and time do you spend on overtime trying to get on time and to meet those commitments? You will also experience a substantial reduction in lead time through your shop. By cutting WIP in half, it typically reduces by half. So if you ever have the situation where somebody's requesting or even demanding a shorter lead time, this is certainly can help. And it's going to potentially provide you a competitive advantage over your competition. If your maintenance shop can do things faster and turn things around faster than the competition, that's a huge competitive advantage. Chaos will reduce because the system is visual. There's one priority system and everyone is on the same page, so there's no need to run around firefighting. And as your lead time reduces relative to your quoted lead time, you actually create a buffer. And this buffer allows you to absorb variability and meet promised due dates. Now, if you don't really have quoted lead times, if you really are just doing internal repairs, then all that does is it provides less manufacturing downtime and more flexibility. The biggest result is you've created a competitive advantage. Now you have something to sell. better than the competition. So this can be a huge competitive advantage for any manufacturing operation. And a lot of the shops I work with are not just maintenance shops inside of other bigger manufacturers. Some of them are standalone job shops. And particularly in standalone job shop situations, what happens is you create this competitive advantage and you free up this capacity, which allows you to then sell more. And it can have a big financial impact. When you reduce your lead time from 6 weeks to, say, 3 weeks, you can sell twice as much. So sales double, assuming that you have customers willing to buy more. Truly variable costs in theory of constraints, TVCs are truly variable costs. These are the costs that vary by each sale. For example, raw material, outside services, and sales commission. And we do not allocate direct labor to truly variable costs. So T is the throughput and results when we subtract truly variable costs from the sales. Direct labor, all other wages, and fixed costs would be included in operating expenses. So in this example, this company went from $300,000 to $1.1 million in profits. That's an $800,000 increase with the same people and resources. And even if you're just doing this as a maintenance shop inside of a bigger manufacturing organization, your manufacturing organization gains this flexibility, and there's less overtime needed. When we started today, I asked you to imagine what it would be like in your business if you were getting more done faster. And I'm just wondering if this is something close to what you wrote down. Shorter lead times. What's in it for you or for your company to get more out faster? And what would that do for you? 99+ due date performance. What would happen if you consistently met customer expectations for delivery? And can you even imagine how that would work? How much less Pepto-Bismol would you need to go through? Increased sales. How much more could you sell if you had a total handle on scheduling and a clear priority system that would allow everyone on your team to align to the same consistent goal, getting more quality work done faster? And what would that clear priority system do for shop communications? Wouldn't it be nice if manufacturing also could look at your velocity board for maintenance and have an idea of what you guys were up against and really enhance that communication? Reduced overtime. How much money do you pay out every month in overtime that comes as a result of your current scheduling system? What else could you do with that money? And what about more free time? Okay, now this is where it becomes really interesting. If you didn't have to bog down your employees with efficiency and they were focused on velocity, they would actually have more free time. So how would you use that? And now let's talk about people for a moment. What would your life be like if you were surrounded by happy employees and ecstatic customers? What would your stress levels be if you weren't constantly at the mercy of risk-taking chaos and stress? And what would your bottom line do if you and everyone on your team could simply answer the question, why should I buy from you? This may not be exactly what you wrote down, but you need to be clear on the outcome you want. I can tell you one thing for sure. If you're not clear on what you want, it'll never happen. But if some version of this is what you want for you and your employees, then how can we make it happen? If you're asking these questions, then I'm really excited for you. What that means is that you're already thinking through the process and you're way ahead of your competitors. The key is customizing it. The size of your velocity board, what's included in your full kit checklist versus what's on the piece of paper that goes on the velocity board, how to deal with all your unique situations. Figuring all that out is critical for your success. So your one remaining question is probably, but will it work in our case? You know, we're different. We have some unique abilities. How do I customize it for me? And those are great questions. And there's too many people on the call to go one by one and determine if each of you, if your companies are a good fit for what we talked about today. But I agree that it's really important to understand, will it work in your situation? I find that taking those individual conversations offline works best so that we don't bore everybody with your specifics and that so you can be as candid as needed. I'd be happy to talk one-on-one with you to determine if and how this approach might work for you. We need to dig in and understand your current situation and constraints. And if you'd like to have a chat, you can go to the address that you see on the screen right now. You'll need to enter in your name and phone number so that we can call you to schedule a time to talk. There's no charge, but there are limited slots because these calls are in depth. I really need to understand your situation, understand what you're dealing with to really make sure that this solution will work for you. So I think we've got time for some questions today, but I want to thank eMaintenance for hosting this and thank all of you for being here and being present and investing in yourself and your company. So I really do appreciate that. And Rona, I think we can take some questions if some questions have come in.
We sure can. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Lisa. And again, to all our listeners out there, a couple of you have been typing in your questions, but please feel free to direct your questions. Just enter them into the questions feature and go to webinar. And Dr. Lisa has agreed to stay till the top of the hour and answer as many as she can for you. And we had one come in from Chris, Dr. Lisa, that said, how would this work in a maintenance shop with a lot of breaking fixes and emergency calls? Can you explain how the system works in that type of environment?
Yeah, maintenance shops are always really interesting because you're kind of like an emergency room. You know, it's not like you have a whole backlog of orders that you get to kind of sift through and figure out which ones to do in which order. You are literally having emergencies come in and having to deal with them. The way that we can accommodate emergencies is because we have this velocity board and we have controlled our WIP. We know when we start something how long it's going to take for it to get done. Now, as emergencies come in, we can also, because we now have this predictable system of when I start it, I know about how long it's going to take. If I do happen to have a backlog, I know how long the wait time is. And now something, maybe even a bigger emergency comes in, and I can now look at the tube release board and the velocity board and get a sense of, okay, if this emergency is going to jump in front of everything on the tube release board, what's the effect? And the right people can make the decision about which priorities do we want, which thing is more important than anything else. So the system can make it easier for you to deal with these emergencies as they come in. But the other thing is that because you're getting more done faster, you have less of a backlog. It's less disruptive, it's less chaotic. So that really helps in this particular situation as well. Emergencies will always be a pain, they'll always be a distraction, but what we want is a system that makes them easier to deal with and less chaotic to deal with.
Great. And one of our, we are being asked a common question, will today's recording be available for the attendees? And I would like to say yes, it will. I'll be sending out a link probably tomorrow to the recording of today's session if you'd like to share it. And also, I believe that Dr. Lisa will be reaching out directly to each of you to share a link in order to download her ebook as well. Another question that came in, Dr. Lisa, is we have people here that have eMaint CMMS or other types of CMMS or other different types of scheduling systems. And can you tell us how you might, people here from a variety of systems, including eMaint, how you might utilize a velocity board with other software systems that help you do your scheduling?
Sure. Yeah, velocity scheduling system is not software, but it will work with whatever software you have. Where your software is going to come into play is helping you determine your priority release order. So let me just grab a pen here and I can draw this out. So you've got your velocity board and we've got the tube release board. Remember, the tube release board has the jobs queued up. So we don't have all of our work in process currently in process. We're taking some of it out, and when we take the work in process out, it's in priority release order. So presumably your highest priority stuff is in process, and then in priority release order you have the next stuff queued up. Well, where your software systems can come into play is if you already have these jobs in that system, we can use that to come up with this priority release order. And that's part of what I call detail planning. So it's in the detail planning is where the interface will happen between your software and Velocity scheduling system. And if you don't have software, it's okay. I provide, Excel spreadsheets and things like that. You don't have to have software. But if you do have software and your software is helpful, then of course we want to take advantage of that. We don't want to do any double data entry.
Yes, and when you describe the red, yellow, and green, I believe, the 3 different levels, that can easily be translated into priorities that
Correct.
most system has, so that you kind of know how to, you're just doing it visually and with a color coding, and very customized, which is great.
Yeah, your software will still play a role, your software will still be important, but this is a visual manual system out on the shop that everybody interacts with, everybody participates with. There's no longer the situation where one person has a schedule in their back pocket. This is where it's visual, nothing can fall through the cracks, nothing can get lost, and you can really interact with the system.
Right. Yeah, a real visual communication tool. You also mentioned the importance of reducing work in process, and I would like to ask for our listeners out there, Dr. Lisa, how you might go about doing that and reducing work in process. That was such a key to being able to achieve the results.
Yeah, well, common sense is going to prevail here, but you have however much, usually you have almost your entire backlog, whatever work is you have in-house tends to be in process at some level. It may not have been started, but it could be, it's available to be worked on. What we want to do is reduce the amount of work that's available to be worked on. So we put on the velocity board the highest priority stuff that we're saying, this is what we're working on, and this is the priority order. And the to-be release board has the next highest priority stuff getting ready to come in. So if I said to you, I want you to go out and find out how much work you have out in the shop, and then, just find out what you have, and then prioritize it for me. Tell me which is the most important versus which is the least important, and what we're going to do is keep the half that's most important out there and the half that is a little less, although it's all always important, but the half that's at the lower end of the list is what's going to go on the to-be release board. And by doing that, everything is going to speed up. So even the stuff that you take out of work in process and put on the to-be release board, it will get done faster than if you had left everything in. And I know that's very counterintuitive. So when you go to cut work in process, you want to use your priorities. The other thing to take into account is sometimes if you did it just based on priorities, you could have one area that's overwhelmed and another area with nothing to do. So you've got to use some common sense there as well. You don't want to take all the work out of one area and leave all the work in another area, because essentially that's not going to give us good flow. It will just be backed up at the one area that has all the work. So some combination of priorities and an even distribution of work is what we want to do when we leave. We decide what work to leave in process versus what work we take out of process.
Okay, that's very helpful. Well, I'm afraid, Dr. Lisa, we are out of time today.